sister who's the essence of the African woman. Her topic will be myths in black male and female relationships. She's the president and founder of the International Black Women's Congress, professor of Afro-American Studies at Princeton University, and the author of The Black Woman. Sisters and brothers, let's put our hands together and welcome Dr. LaFrancis Rose Rogers. Dr. LaFrancis Rogers Rose.
Good morning. Good to be here and good to see so many people out so early in the morning. I want to make my remarks in such a way that we can have lunch before it gets too late, and so that I will not take all of that time that you see listed on the program, but I do want to be able to raise some questions and put the topic that I have in focus of what it is that we're trying to do. And that is that we're trying to look at our lives and where we are and put that in a perspective that sort of transcends where we are so that we can understand the broader picture. And at the same time, we want to understand at a level that if we have some problems in our own everyday lives with our relationships specifically, we then can begin to understand that. And to me, that's what knowledge is about. It's about putting something out that's broad enough that you can cover a number of people, but at the same time, have it at a level that you can take some of the knowledge and information and use it in your own lives. And so what I have to say today, I hope we'll be able to do both of those things. I do have available at the end of the session the volume that my brother and I have done on strategies for resolving conflicts in black male-female relationships, if you're interested in that. Obviously, where we are today in 1989 in male-female relationships is that we are divided in our families, even in relationships where husbands and wives are still together. We see a tremendous amount of conflict, and a lot of that conflict does not necessarily come because you cannot get along as a couple, but because outside and external things come inside your family and you don't even know what they are. And what I want to talk about today, if I can put this into some historical perspective, is to talk about how other people have gotten into our business. Okay, that is the essence of what I'm talking about, and it goes back 5,000, 6,000 years ago when people came in and saw a relationship that African men and women had with each other, and they didn't understand that relationship because no other people historically have ever had that kind of relationship since that time. Okay, Africans have never treated their women other than as equals. So the whole concept of women being different and i.e. inferior to men have never existed. They have been different from men because that is how the Creator made us. A man is a man and a woman is a woman, and we both got things to do. But what I have to do is no more significant than what you have to do. But what we have permitted a group of people to do is to come in and lay their definitions on top of us and what it is that they think we ought to be doing as men and women. And some of us are so bad off that we can't think differently. And that when we think about women being of equal status to men, we then think that is some white woman's agenda. Because we don't know our history. All right. And when we don't know our history, then we don't know how we ought to be behaving. We have no model, no picture from which we can return and what we ought to do. So let me just suggest to you that knowledge and information exist at various levels and in various groups in relationship to the existential basis of that group. And that is that I know what I know because of my own personal experiences, because of how I have been viewed by other people that I think is important to me, and how I have then internalized my own experiences. And so some of us then behave the way that we behave because that's the way our mothers behave, that's the way our fathers behave, and we don't know any better. And we then refuse to bring in other information because other information would cause for us to question our mothers and question our fathers. And those are two sacred people in our community that we don't question. And therefore we continue to do things even when we know that these things are wrong for us to do, because that's the way my mother did it, that's the way my father did it. And so we know then when we look at knowledge that my membership in a particular racial group, i.e. African American, determines how I perceive of the world and how I see the world. My gender, and it is my sex, determine how I see and how I view the world. And it took me a long time to realize deep in my soul that the way a man sees the world is not the way that I see the world. And that sometimes in order for me to interact with him, I have to put myself in his position and try to see reality the way that he is seeing reality, although I know it is not my reality. The same thing must exist as it relates to a man. A woman does not see the world the way that a man sees the world. And so when a man comes by and says, well, why are you feeling this way? Why are you saying this way? Why are you getting emotional about something? I'm getting emotional about it because I am a woman. And part of the very basic fiber of me says that I have to get emotional about something. So sometimes the brothers come by and say, well, calm down, sister. Don't be so emotional. No, then you don't want to talk to me. You want to go talk to a man. Right? Because if you are going to talk to me, you have to talk to me based on where I'm coming from. That's what a good relationship is. A good relationship says that sometimes I have to put myself in your shoes, and sometimes you have to put yourself in my shoes. It cannot be 75% of the time I'm in your shoes and you ain't never tried mine on. You see, that's not a relationship. That's slavery. That's something else. And the brother just finished talking about what they did to us in slavery. We don't want to put each other in slave mentalities and slave behavior patterns. That is, if we're going to respect each other, if we're going to love each other, and if we're going to do what's right by each other so that we can do what? Raise our children in such a way that they respect us and they do the right things by us. They cannot do right by us if we are not doing right by each other. And that's part of our problem. That's part of what's happening as we see our children going astray, as we see our children being sucked up by a very vile system, is that they cannot see this positive, supportive, give and take relationship. We have too many women out here by themselves trying to raise these children and not having any man in their lives putting in quality time and helping them do that. And part of that has been us letting somebody else tell us how we ought to run our relationships. So we see men leaving women because they say the women are too bossy. They use another word. I'm not going to use that word today. All right? And that's because they are coming from the perspective that a woman as a child should be seen and not heard. So when I say to my husband, or when I say to my boyfriend, I'm not going to do that. You know, he might say, well, who you think you're talking to? And if I'm an adult and you're an adult, I'm talking to you. And then he might say, well, I'm not taking that from you, and you might get the back part of his hand. And I'm not here today to talk about the growing violence against black women. Come to my national conference in September, and that's one of the issues. We need to talk about it among ourselves. We don't need to put our linen out there in the public and go on no national TV about it. But for sure, brothers need to come back and protect their sisters, and I mean their blood sisters, the way they used to do, so that when a man comes in and he takes your sister, you let him know that that is my sister. And if you don't know how to treat her, I will come back and get her and get you too. You see, we don't have brothers anymore protecting their sisters the way that brothers used to do it. When I grew up in Virginia, my brother said that this child has 2 brothers and 9 male first cousins that will kick your butt if you ever touch her. And we don't have brothers doing that. So we got sisters in relationships that are not good relationships, and the brothers are beating them up, and they don't know how to say anything to anybody, and they can't talk to their brothers because their brother's perception is as if you just shut up, be quiet, then this man wouldn't do certain kinds of things to you. So that we come from different perspectives. We have different existential bases, and that is the existential basis of a man is not the same as the existential basis of a woman. My knowledge base, my reality. Also, we differ by age. And so that what I'm saying to you today, if you are a young adult, if you are an adolescent, then you might say, well, that's old stuff. Because I'm talking to you as a middle-aged woman who have had certain kinds of experiences. So when I hear my college students say, well, a black man ain't this and a black man, I mean, you're too young. How many relationships have you had? How long have you been out there? You don't know what you're talking about. You know, we have to talk to the elders to find out what a relationship ought to be like. You need to talk to some of these older women and men who have managed to stay together for 30, 40, 50 years, and we need to ask them, how did you do that? And they'll tell you that the road was not always easy. I got a cousin that's been married for 35 years. She said I had to leave him twice. Leave him twice to straighten him up. So you don't know what you got to do. But sometimes we've gotten caught into the Western's definition of relationships that we cut these relationships off too quickly. You may need to just move away for a while, get yourself together, leave the avenue open so you can still come back. But when you get a divorce in the European sense, you done severed that ties. In addition to that, you done open up the possibilities you can go and marry somebody else. So in the South long ago, black folks didn't get a divorce. If anybody's of any age, you'll know your mother, your father might have separated, but they stayed married all their lives. You see, my mother and my father separated a long time ago because my father wasn't doing right. But they were so interlocked that my father died 11 months after my mother because he couldn't stand the possibility of living without knowing that she was someplace else in the world. But when we get these divorces, you know, we now have a divorce rate that's about 3 times higher than the white population. Better to be separated than divorced, particularly for African American women, if I can put that punch in. If you're going to separate, don't get a divorce. Do not get a divorce. My class, the class position that I belong to, we're talking about people leaving the African American community because they get a certain amount of education and they make a certain amount of money. They leave the community. That's class. That's what would be called socioeconomic status. That's not how it exists in traditional African society. There's no such, there's a family. Families have different classes of people, but you all belong to the same family. You are one. And so you talk about families and how you know families. You say, is that a good family? So that when you're about to meet somebody, your mother might say, who is her mother? Who's her father? Tell me about her aunts. Where you say they live? Now bring them to my house. Let me see them. It wasn't about socioeconomic status. It was about the quality and the character of that family. You wouldn't want to marry into a family where the men are known to abuse their women. See, and you can check that out, because if you live in a community and you done seen that the fella's mother has a black eye all the time, And the psychologists are finally telling us that abuse running families. Black folks knew that all the time. You didn't have to tell them that. The mother say, if the father beats the mother, your husband gonna beat you. It's that simple. You follow the pattern in terms of your socialization. Don't take no profound 15-year study to tell you that. You sit down and your mother say, check him out. Don't be rushing into relationships. How long have you known him? 6 months is not enough. I have a friend from Nigeria said it took him 10 years before he was permitted to marry his wife. All of the brothers, all of them had to check him out, make sure that they knew everything about his family before they would let the daughter marry into that family. All of these factors then are important in understanding the knowledge base that we have. So that when we talk about relationships, when we talk about male-female relationships, I suggest that we must understand the historical perspective of male-female relationships. We must go all the way back as far as we can in time, in our time, and see what that relationship was like. Then we have to understand the developmental aspect of male-female relationship. We cannot just take male-female relationship in 1989 or 1969. Can we even go back and look at relationships of 1900, 1850 to see what those relationships were like? We must understand the variations in role behavior and role expectations. And we must develop conflict resolutions that speak to our existential basis rather than somebody else's existential basis. An African-American brother, Dr. Aaron Grissom from Penn State, in a book called The Dialectic of Betrayal, maintains that there is a sense of betrayal that runs throughout African-American community. And he talks about betrayal at a number of levels. The class betrayal he discusses, but specifically I'm concerned about in his book on the dialectic of betrayal, he talks about the betrayal, or the sense of betrayal as it relates to male-female relationships. And he talks about the publications of the book, The Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, and the reaction that black men in particularly had about that book. And it was a reaction that we have been betrayed. Another sense of betrayal, is the book for colored girls who consider suicide when the rainbow is enough. That's like we have been betrayed. The man is feeling that he's been betrayed, that people are running us down in public. I said earlier that you don't air your dirty linen in public, and where was that aired? But on Broadway, The Color Purple. If you saw that movie, it was a sense of betrayal, and people say, well, can't she write what she want to write? Yes, she can, but when it comes at the level that it came to us, and that is at a large national, international level, then you've got to look at the broader dynamics. It's very difficult to get people to understand that at an individual level, you can do some things and it's all right because that's you on you. And sometimes you can do it because it's you on your family. But when you come to a level where you're now having an impact, a major impact on the whole public, then you have to be mindful of what you do. You've got to be mindful of what you put out there. And you've got to talk about what Margaret Walker Alexander talks about. You've got to talk about the balance. You can talk about The Color Purple, but when you show the brothers, you've got to show the possibility that there's some good brothers out here. You see, you can't show, in that movie, you can't find one decent brother in the whole movie. I mean, even if it were her brother, you got to show somebody out there doing something. But also, all of those books, The Black Macho, the Myth of the Superwoman, and that's a story in and of itself for colored girls. These are stories from out of the perspective of those women. Okay, you can even see some of The Color Purple and Alice Walker's Story of the Nun in Tony K. Bambara's book on the black woman. That's 1967. She was already beginning to write that. Or for colored girls who consider suicide, you can see some of that author's mother's social worker. Okay, so if you got to know the history of these people. And Shanga's mother is a social worker. Her father is a medical doctor in Trenton, New Jersey. Part of that was her trying to get out of that upper middle class modality that she was raised in. So as she's going around New York doing that in the coffee houses, she's trying to free herself of the shackles of having been raised away from her people and not knowing how to get back. See, before you embrace somebody, you need to know that person's history. You need to check them out. You need to know how long they've been saying what they're saying and under what circumstances. Okay? And I'm sure if you talk to her today, she might say, if I were to write that play today, I wouldn't write it exactly the way I wrote it in 1972 or 71. Okay? But there is this sense of betrayal and also a sense of loneliness that runs throughout the black community as it relates to black women are feeling abandoned, black men are feeling abandoned, and we're not getting together. And so that 50% of all black men and women over the age of 25 are single, separated, widowed, or divorced. A lot of us, I have my apartment, you have your apartment. You say hi and goodbye to me at the door, I say hi and goodbye to you at the door. And the only sad thing, and I shouldn't say that, but the greatest thing is that black women are more than likely going home to some children without having any kind of a support system. But it's this sense that nobody loves me kind of thing that black men are suffering from. And black women have gotten so out of sync with themselves that they don't know how to do that nurturing. They don't know how to put themselves in their position sometimes and say, I know how the system is treating you. And sometimes we've got to force the brother to give up the job, for an example. I mean, that's what historical old black women used to do to their husbands. Go down and quit for them. We quit today. We don't want to work for you anymore. You know, but we're not supporting each other that way, the way that we ought to be. We're not being nurturing to each other. So we are suffering from a sense of betrayal. Aaron Grissom goes on to say that in the midst of a betrayal, we also have another group of people who think that they are sacrificing too much. So you've got betrayal on one hand and an overburden of sacrifice. And I'm sure that this group here today feel like sometimes the burden is too heavy on them in terms of sacrificing, because when you have left the group, which a lot of people have, then that supporting the group and gearing it up goes to a small group of people, and a lot of times they're not supported either spiritually or financially at the way that they ought to do, and so that they have a sense of sacrificing, and they want to know for what reason, because nobody seems to appreciate what they are doing. So we're getting it on both sides. You see, we're getting then a group of people who are becoming burned out. And they're getting burned out because they're not getting the kind of support. And that support simply means, brother, you're doing a good job. Brother, take this $25, this $50, add it to the cost, you see. Or people who want to come in and check your books out. Know that you're sacrificing. Know that you don't have no money. Know that you're doing a miracle to still be alive. But then they want to come in with a European definition. Let me examine your books. What did you do with this $25? Okay? But let me move on, though, to say that male-female relationship is germane to an Afrocentric perspective. That in order to talk about worldwide liberation, in order to talk about us doing what we have to do, we've got to tighten up this male-female thing. I mean, we've got to get it straight. We got to go back and see, can we reinvent the wheel and do some things that they used to do, because we have over-internalized negative definitions about black men and women. And let me just take then the next 15 minutes and talk to you about some of the myths, somebody else's knowledge. What I say then is much of what we know about ourselves, much of what we know about male-female relationship comes from somebody else's definition of reality and not our own definition of reality. And where are we getting this information from? A lot of us are getting the information from the media. And that is that our children, we talk about the runaway adolescent pregnancy. I work in a teenage pregnancy program in Hillside, New Jersey. You talk about the runaway pregnancy program. It's a consequences of those children buying somebody else's definition of reality and our not feeding our definition of reality every day the way to television. Can you imagine that a black child on the average views 7 hours of TV a day? That 6 of those hours in some kind of way is dealing with sex. So can't you see that by the time they finally feel their sexuality come on them at the age of 12 or 13, they are so sexually overstimulated that they got to go find somebody? And sometimes we put all of the blame on the boys, but girls mature more rapidly than boys. And my brother said, if I could keep the girls off the telephone from this young boy, the boy hasn't even started thinking about girls yet, but the girls are on there singing songs, the music that they listen to, so that the mothers are not training their daughters in the way that they ought to say, one, that a female does not move, and this is not even talking about chauvinism. I'm telling you the difference between male and female. If you want to maintain your sanity and be a whole woman, you don't chase a man. If you got to chase him, he don't want you. He wants somebody else. Because the person that he wants, he will chase. Tell my daughter, you don't call him. Now maybe after he's called 4 or 5 times, it's all right to call him once. Yeah, occasionally. But you can't be calling them no 4 or 5 times a day. Huh? Because there's something in the fiber of a male, which I don't understand. They got to write it. That says if the chase ain't right, I don't want it. Regardless of what they say. And my mother knew that so well. And I can't tell you today the way she used to run it down to me. She'd be 82 if she were living. But she used to run it down to me. Say, that's not what you want to do. You see. And you do have to carry yourself in a certain kind of way. My mother say, Mr. Smith can get drunk on Friday and fall all over the ground. Get up on Saturday morning, you know what his name is? Mr. Smith. A woman do the same thing Friday, get up on Saturday, you know what her name is? Absolutely, we won't even say it. She can never live it down. That's the realities of the world that we live in, and we must, if you want to be treated in a certain kind of way, you must adhere within a broad parameter to that kind of behavior. We got somebody else's definition of reality and not our own definition of reality. So it's coming from the TV, and we are not being diligent to make sure that we are training them differently. Obviously, we need societies or organizations that are going to train young African American girls on how to behave. Okay? We need those. If it's no more than, if 5 people are training 2 girls, you've done something. You don't have time to wait for some large group to come by. You got to do what you can do where you are. Because we do know that ultimately a little bit at a time finally adds up. And when it adds up, it begins to be like a snowball. We talked about that as it relates to Kwanzaa. And very few people do it and don't even know the name, but look where it is 20 years from now, you see. Little bit at a time, little bit at a time. So we start training our girls, having structured lectures, structured presentations. We're not doing things with our children. You see, it used to be that a mother would always have her children with her. But now we are so much into this other woman's perspective that we want to hide our children away. That we aren't proud when we become grandmothers anymore, because we're so much into this mentality that I gotta stay young. I don't want anybody to know that I'm that old. And so now you can't even get black folks who will share their age anymore. Whereas age used to be wisdom. The older you got, the better it is. But now everybody is like, I don't want to tell you my age, so don't ask me your age. Or if I tell my age, people say, oh, you look good for your age. You know, give me a break. I am African. You see, I don't age. You see. So it's no such thing as I look good for my age. But it is Europeans. It is Europeans who get to be 50 years old. And they are lucky if they look 45. You see, but an African American woman, and you can take a Lena Horne that's 73. You see, and a friend of mine recently said, I'm in love with a senior citizen. And I said, who? He said, see, Lena Horne. You see, we don't age unless we take their definitions, their extended basis. Now, if you get to be 30 and think you're old, you are old. If you get to be 30 and say, you know, I'm just begun, you've just begun. And the wrinkle that you took will leave as soon as you tell it to go away. But you take that up. Why take up somebody else's vibrations? That it doesn't make no sense to me. But I'm looking at aging black women who say to me, well, you look good to be 50 years old. And I am 52 years old. You look good. You know. Yeah. You know. You know, you look good. But you know, it's about how you carry yourself. Right? It's about, did you abuse yourself when you were coming up? It's about, did you let somebody whack you upside your head when you were coming up? Right? And it's about, are you still in an environment where every day somebody's gnawing at your self-esteem? So that every time you do something, you can never do anything right. Don't you know that's the slowest death and the worst death you can have? Of course that's going to age you. You cannot stay in those kinds of relationships. They are detrimental. They are unhealthy. Who else has defined us? Television, social science, the psychologist, the sociologist defined our relationships. I think that when we finish this 20th century and we look back on two of the most detrimental books ever written about black people, we will say it was The Mark of Oppression by Cardinal and Oversee, that said that we suffered from low self-esteem and hated ourselves. And the other one will be the Moynihan Report that said that the black family is a matriarch and that black women have emasculated their men. And don't you know, I hear folks are saying both of those things on a regular basis. One, black folks hate themselves, and two, that the black man has been emasculated, or the black woman is a matriarch and she's to this and she's to that. Taking somebody else's definition, as the brother just said, someone who's never meant us any good, someone who raped our women, right? Destroyed our men, castrated our men, lynched them, and then we're going to let them turn around, do research on us, tell us that we hate ourselves and we internalize that. And believe me, once you internalize it, then you do start hating yourself. If somebody told you that you hate being black, and then you wake up one morning and you are jet black and you say, well, you know, you look pretty good. And then somebody comes to you, well, you can't feel good about yourself because you're too dark. And I grew up like that. I grew up with somebody saying, well, you're too dark to feel good about yourself. And I said, well, you don't give me a break. You see, because we let somebody else internalize our definitions. But I was fortunate to have a mother and a father who did not play that. You see, who did not play color. I don't care what color you are, you're all the same. And that's another issue that we still got to deal with in this community. We still got this light-skinned, good hair, dark-skinned stuff that somebody put out there, those same people, and we have not dealt with it yet. We still need to have some workshops dealing with this whole thing on color and what it does mean and it doesn't mean. But just let me say that all light-skinned women don't like themselves. And all dark-skinned women don't like themselves. It's about 50-50. Because you see, you can be very light-skinned and people talked about you like a dog when you was growing up so that you hate your color. Got a light-skinned girlfriend and said, I want to make sure I marry somebody jet black because my children will not suffer the way that I suffer. So don't just assume that because a person is a certain, because then you're buying somebody else's definition of reality and not your own definition of reality. So we done took somebody else's definition and not our own definition. Took sociologists, that's all Moynihan was, and somebody in New York State votes for him every year, so he's the senior senator. Nobody had ever heard heard of this PhD sociologist until he wrote the Moynihan Report. And we know that the worst thing that you can do in the black community is to play the dozens. And reading now about some things on Kemet, I understand how you cannot play the dozens. The most sacred thing that you could ever have is your mother. She determines all things, and therefore you don't talk about your mother. It came down to us in the South is, you can't talk about my mother. Like they just say one thing, they never even seen your mother, you're supposed to beat them up. Right? This man talked about our mothers, and do you think the brothers beat him up? Nobody. No hair was ever hurt on his head. We then got intellectual and did some intellectual cross-analysis, multi-regression analysis to show where it wasn't quite what he said. And he didn't need that kind of analysis. He needed somebody to jack him up against the wall and say, if you ever say anything public about a black woman again, this is what's going to happen to you. And we did not do that. And so therefore, he can get on television with Joyce Ladner and make Joyce look bad. If you saw him on the Bill Donahue show. They should have put him on there with Milana. But they wouldn't do that. You see, they wouldn't do that. No, they put him with a soft-spoken black woman. And then he just walked all over. Like, I told y'all this was what's going to happen. He didn't tell us that. When he wrote in 1965, he said it had already happened. He said that the black family was a matriarch. And when he wrote it, the black family at that point was 78% male-female. Today, 1989, 47%. What slavery couldn't do for us, what the Depression couldn't do, has happened to us in 25 years. We've gone from 78% male-female families to no more than 53% male-female families. Less than 60% of all black children live with both parents. We let somebody else come into our house so that when I said, no, I'm not going to do that, you turn around and say, yeah, that's what's wrong with black women, blah, 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 and you walk off and leave me. Or if the black man doesn't have a job, you say, well, that's what's wrong with you. You're lazy, no good, blah, 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 and you leave him. We've let somebody else's definitions. One definition that said in the 1960s that a black woman needs to step back, let a black man lead for a while. Where does that come from? But they picked it up from out of the Moynihan Report someplace. And I found it very interesting that Moynihan Report coming out in 1965 came out just about the time that we were getting into the black revolution in the 1960s and about to stretch. Came before 1968, before 1966. That was out there. So in the movement itself, I understand. There was a kind of thing with the sisters can do this and the brothers can do that. Already that had been infiltrated into the movement before the movement could take off, with black men and women walking side by side in the struggle. Okay? So black women, though, if you look at our history, you'll know have never led black men any place. We've always been supportive, and we have, in some points, been leaders. So we talk about a Harriet Tubman, or we talk about Fannie Lou Haman, or we talk about, I'm trying to think of the lady's name with the whole anti-lynching. Ida B. Wells. We talk about Ida B. Wells, who, if it were not for Ida B. Wells, where would black men be today? It was she that raised the whole world's consciousness about and used to pack a pistol. All right? So, I mean, we were always doing things for each other when we were in leadership positions. It wasn't about one being on top of the others. It was about us doing things side by side and for each other. And so that we bought that myth. We bought the myth that the black woman has too much education. Neither one of us got enough education, the male nor female. It doesn't make any sense to talk about, well, I'm not going to go get a PhD because then I'm not going to be able to find a husband. If you got a man and he's threatened by your PhD, then you don't need him. Right? Because he's into somebody else's reality, not your own. You know, you can't take a piece of paper to bed. I've never seen anybody go to bed with their cap and gown and robe on. And when they get into bed, say, honey, call me doctor. But we buy somebody else's definition and didn't get hung up. But we all need an education. We all need knowledge so that we can read and write for ourselves and think for ourselves, so that we don't continually buy into somebody else's research, somebody else's definition. So that these are just some of the myths. Another myth says that black men are interested in white women. That every man you see is interested in trying to get a white woman. That is so far away from reality. That's their definition. As my brothers say, when brothers are together, they don't talk about white women. Less than 2% of all black men are married to white women. We'll leave them alone. But don't you know you can talk up something? That's what the word means. You talk it up, you put it out there, it's going to come back to you. So you keep talking about the brothers and white women. What will it ultimately happen? They'll be there. We belong together. We belong together. We were put here to be together. There's nobody who understands us better than we understand each other. And then I cannot think of a better person in the universe than a black man and a black woman. So when you go any place else, you're not at home. And what we need to do, we need to come back home. We need to get together. If you're in a relationship and you're having some conflict, you need to sit down, knock out some of the myths, see can you figure out how you can start saying some nice things to each other. It's amazing how relationships will improve if you just say, you know, I appreciate you. Come by, give them a kiss for no reason at all. Come by, give her a kiss for no reason at all. And sometimes a big hug is worth all the words in the world. Don't you know that this society is bent on trying to kill us? And unless we nurture each other, it will do what it has been to do, and we must go on. You see, the victory is surely ours if we do what we have to do, and the time is now.
Okay, we want to thank Dr. LaFrancis Rogers-Rose. We're going to take just a few questions briefly, then we move on to the next speaker. We're going to try to keep within our time frame as much as possible. So for the questions, you have any questions, we probably take 3 questions. Can you line up to the microphone right here?
Thank you.
I heard it stated that you don't believe in divorce. I was wondering if a relationship is abusive to the mother and the children, and the sister tried to maintain this relationship for about 5 to 10 years and it's not working, if she should continue such an abusive relationship. If she should, I'd like you to tell us why she should, and if she should leave that relationship, I'd like you to tell us what kind of support systems or social network working that would be helpful to her and the kids.
Okay, I really didn't say that you should stay into an abusive relationship. That's what I've been saying, not. But what I was trying to say is that historically, when relationships were not going well, black men and women would separate. And that is, they would leave, but they would not actually get a divorce. I think of my own Southern experience. I think of some of my Caribbean experience where you would separate. You're not in the relationship, but you have not divorced. Once you have divorced in this country, you have really legally severed those ties. And so I was talking about not divorcing in that sense. And particularly since so many black men and women do not remarry. And also, I think that the sense of commitment, or the sense that we are still together although we're not together, is still there. I would not suggest that anyone stays in an abusive relationship. An abusive relationship can be physically violent or mentally violent. And if one is moving out of that relationship, then you are asking the question, what kind of support network do they need? My organization, the International Black Women's Congress, is a network of women of African descent trying to offer support in any kind of way that we possibly can. For sure, if you have children I suggest that you move close to your mother. And what women have tended to do, because they're buying, again, somebody else's definition, they have tended to not want to go back home or not want to move around a family. What better support system can you have but your mother and your mother's people? And so if you're from Virginia and you're divorced, and I suggest you go back to Virginia. If you're from the Caribbean and you're divorced, I suggest you go back to the Caribbean. Because otherwise, what you'll find yourself is in a place like New York or in a place like Newark, and you really don't have people who are going to keep your kids when they have to be kept. And you find yourself then putting them in situations that are unhealthy for the children, or you find situations now where mothers are leaving their children to run out for a few minutes and come back, houses on fire, whatever. You need to be where you have a built-in support system, and what better support system, what sure support system than that of your mother and your mother's people. Well, you see, we can always speak of exceptions. And I'm speaking today just as a social psychologist. I'm speaking about the generalities now. I told you we can always talk about individual cases. And it's at that point then that we would have to do a one-on-one. But in a general sense, I would say the best thing to do in a general sense would be to be near your mother or your father's people. Your family of consanguinity. Yes.
Thank you very much for the stimulating presentation, first of all. I would like to preface my question with a comment. One of the other scholars here today always teaches us that we cannot let anybody else get over us from definition. Because if they do, we end up finding ourselves out of position. My question is, how can we, part of the nationalist community, begin to come to terms with the honesty that is needed to resolve the problem between both male and female in building a more divine relationship based on the Afrocentric principle of the heart, and also to face the person in the mirror, because some of the most abusive relationships that came out of the national community, where the sisters are being stood upon, they've been dogged upon, they are not engaged in stimulating intellectual discussion to resolve problems in our community, and they main focus has been to cook and to have faith. We got to be honest about this, faithful, and solve these problems. Thank you.
I appreciate your question. I don't know that I really have all of the answers, but I would suggest that these kinds of symposiums are obviously important kinds of things to do. We need to get together in smaller sessions so that we are in a position to talk to each other in a loving way. You need somebody who will conduct these workshops, symposiums, so that it is open and so that people can really feel free that they can say what they have to say. I think sisters need to come together as sisters and talk about where they are and where they are in their relationships and be honest. And then men need to come together and talk about that. And then we need to come together as a group. We are not doing enough of this, obviously. Now, the last part that you said in terms of what are some of the things that have happened to sisters out of some of the nationalist relationships in the 1960s, I know at least three sisters who came through the 60s and who are very seriously wounded from their self-esteems have still not come together as a consequence of being into some relationships that just was not Afrocentric. I mean, it was somebody else's definition of how a woman ought to behave. And I said to them, and I still say it is somebody who went through that and who have now surmounted that and who's beyond that, who can look back at that and become analytical about it, have to write about that. And it's something that needs to be done. And maybe somebody, without doing a black macho and the myth of the Superman, because that's not it, but who can be analytical and who can take us beyond what that was. I'm not in a position to do that because I was not a part of that and don't really know everything that happened, but somebody who did ought to be able to do that. As I said in my presentation, I think that male-female relationships is one of the most crucial things that we can talk about in terms of the Afrocentric movement in this country. Because if you just got one person doing something, you've left 50% of the population behind, and that means that we are 50% slower than what we ought to be. So we got to have both people. I appreciate your question. Yes.
My question is, I have been reading recently that there are so many more women, black women, in
the race.
Yeah, in relation to men. In other words, I recently read, first I read it was 7 to 1. Very recently I read that now up to 9 to 1. And then within that number, there are men who are in prison, there are men who are drug addicts, there are men who are homosexuals, etc. I also know that a lot of females, black young women, they are left alone. What do you feel about relationships where there's more than one woman in the relationship, where a man may be the head of 2 or 3 different families?
Wow. Heavy question. One, in the book on strategies for resolving black male-female relationships, I have a section there where I talk about the myth of the disappearing male. There is more women in the world than there are men in the world. There are more white women in the United States than there are white men in the United States. I mean, it's just that women outnumber men. That's just a reality. Now, the shortage of, you see, in order to say that the relationship, that there is 7 to 1, then it would say that if there's 700,000 men, there's only 700,000 men, on 100,000 women. The United States government, even knowing that it has undercounted the population every year, and they will undercount it again in 1990. And the population that they miss most often is the male population. Why do they miss the male population? Because the male population is harder to find. Why are they hard to find? They tend to not live in apartments. Those that are missed, they may have a room someplace. Or if they have an apartment, it may be down this alley and up the steps, and around here you'll find a couple of apartments and the brothers live back there. Who are the census takers? The census takers are suburban white middle class women who first of all feel very uncomfortable being in Newark, New Jersey, where I live, or feel very uncomfortable being in West Philadelphia. So they don't go there. I mean, I used to work for the Bureau of Census a long time ago, and I worked in housing. And sometime there was a house that existed in 1960, it's not there in 1970, but the house was built in 1950. It meant somebody missed that house. So you would have to tell somebody in Jeffersonville, Missouri, go back to such and such a block. It was a house there in 1970 and 1960. We think it ought to be there. They don't do that as often with the population. So the only thing that the United States government will say is that we undercounted the black population by 7.6%. They'll tell you that. They're not going to recount. All right. If they undercounted in general by that, I would say they've undercounted the black male population by about 10%. That's why we can say, if they say it's 30 million of us, it's 35 million. If they say it's 35 million, we say it's 40. Because we know that we are undercounted. Okay, but even the United States Census in the worst age category, which is over the age of 40, between the ages, I say between 30 and 44, the U.S. Census says the male-female sex ratio is something like 84. 84 means that for every 100 women, there's 84 men. In order it to be 2 to 1, it would be 100 women, 50 men. So we're a long ways from that. Okay, so to understand what a male-female sex ratio is, it's no place near that. Even the Bureau of the Census would say that. But based on some readings that I've done and some corrective analysis based on some of their own publications, the male-female relationship in that category seems to be something like 90 or 91, and that is for every 100 women, there's 90 to 91 men. Now, that is the civilian population. That the United States Bureau, when they count the population, they count the civilian population. That is people who are not incarcerated. That does not include the men in the armed services. The armed services is another census that they do. In order to find out what the total population is of the United States, they have to count all people in institutions and all people in armed services wherever they are. If you added in the armed services and if you added in the people in prison, it may come out to be 50-50. 100, 100. Now, what is the black male prison population? It is something like 200,000. It's a lot. They're making up something like 47% of all the brothers in prison. But 200,000 is 200,000 is about the population of black males in Newark, New Jersey. It's a lot, but it ain't the whole country. Let's see what we're saying. Now, what about they may be homosexual? I don't know. The homosexuals don't know. But just as you have a growing homosexual population among black men, because we know it's true, 40% of men who die of AIDS, I just learned last weekend, are black males, homosexuals. All right? So we know that they are there. But we also have a growing lesbian population in the black female community that we don't talk about. Sisters who've given up on men because of, for whatever reason, bought into somebody else's definition of reality. I go back to that. So that I don't even know, they may offset each other. You know what I'm saying? Because when you say that, you ignore the fact that there is a counterpart. You talk about gays and lesbians, but because of the sexism in the movement itself, we normally only talk about the gays. The lesbians are set over there to do what you want to do, but you know you don't really matter. Okay? Now, what do I think about a man with more than one wife? In the United States, it is illegal. I think you have to deal with that. That it is illegal to have more than one wife. Now, if you want to ignore that system, so whoever is the second and third and fourth wife, you realize that you have no legal rights. You want to live with that, you can live with that. Then you realize that you were raised by, more than likely, a mother who said, girl, if he cheats on you, kill him. Or you're raised in a situation to say that this is my man, and I am jealous if I see him just talking to a strange woman. See, that's the way, you go back to what I say our knowledge base is. Part of that existential base come out of who raised you and how they raised you. So now, if you have corrected that in your thoughts, and you say, I can live with that, I can deal with that, I am not a jealous woman. Let me just say that in Muslim countries and in countries where they have more than one wife, you talk to some of those women, they will tell you it is an ongoing struggle not to, and you've got to become friends. Is no such thing as a man having 4 wives and the other 3 wives don't know them. In the very traditional African sense, and part of that had nothing to do with religion. In a lot of West African societies, it was a polygamous society and men could have more than one wife. But a lot of times, and what was that associated with? That was associated with the ancestors. That was associated with making sure that you had a certain number of children so that your name could live on and on and on. Okay, and women were only going to have so many children, because having children is not easy. And so what would happen, the first wife might have 3 children, and she said, you know, I've already had 3 children. She might say, I saw a very nice woman who belonged to this group, and I've already talked to her. She is interested. You think you might be interested? She might go find him, and number 1 wife is always number 1 wife. You can't bring in number 2 wife and try to usurp number 1. You see, there's a lot of logistic, structural kinds of things that have happened. But if you're talking about a man cutting out and he got 2 women on the side, don't even talk to me about that. Let's not legitimize no messing around. But if you're talking about somebody trying to work that out the best they can, and everybody knows what's happening, and all of the children are together, and the children know that these are my brothers and sisters and these are my mothers. Not know this one, but they're all my mothers, okay? And you can work that out and you can move into, and remember that everybody has to have their space. It's not like this man is going to bring 4 wives and he got them all in one room. Forget that. In African society, everybody has to have the equivalent space. You've got to be in a position to take care of each one equally. If you're going to buy one a diamond ring, everybody gets the same diamond ring. So that there is a lot of structural things that has to happen. And for some of these relationships, it hasn't happened. And it's just a brother having his cake and eating it too. And we don't want to participate in that. but I think we could participate in one that has really been worked out. And if you're in the mindset, in the headset, that you can transcend the jealousy that exists in this society, transcend the thing that I can't let my husband or my boyfriend talk to anybody else, and you've got that intact, which means that you've got to have your self-esteem together. You've got to really be in love with yourself, that you know that if he's not, he is all right because of whatever. Okay? All right.
We as women, we're children, we're supposed to raise babies. We're supposed to raise babies. I take care of our babies, and we're supposed to raise babies. Men, when they're boys, play with soldiers. I'd like to know, what is a black role for a male in society?
Okay, the parallel may be somewhat questionable, and that is playing with the baby dolls may not give you the kind of mentality that you have to have in order to be a real African woman, because you might see that as a doll, and that's one of the problems that I'm having with some of my adolescents. To know that the best way to see a mother is to watch your mother and pray that you got a good mother who treats those kids and who sometimes hollers at the kids and who say you're getting on my nerves and all of that, and do the whole thing rather than a doll. But what are appropriate role models? I don't think dolls nor those toys are appropriate role models for male or female children. What we've got to do is that we've got to bring the African American male back into the family. And you see, we do whatever we have to do wherever we are at this particular point. If you were in African society, you will know that it is the male then who is the protector of the protector of the village, and so he is the warrior. Now we've got to bring back, I think, that warrior kind of thing. We may not be warring in the same kind of way, but the fact that it is the male who protects the domicile, who protects the community, that's what it is. And so this male child must see other male childs protecting and respecting and doing things. Sometimes he is the teacher. They must see that. But we must get away from giving our children too many toys, period, right? That's what the Europeans have done. That's how the European male can go out indiscriminately and make war, because the only kind of thing that he knows is the toys that make war. You see, when you say protect, you're not simply talking about protecting as it relates to warfare. You're talking about protecting the way that you speak to me, protecting the fact that this village is safe from all kinds of things, including animals or whatever it happens to be. So we need these societies. We need these workshop type things where they're rites of passages, really. You know, like in traditional West African society, the women go through the Sandy, which is 5 years of intensive training. You leave home, you never come back until you're an adult. You may leave when you're 11 or 12 years old and you go someplace else. You don't go far. It's amazing. It's no more than around the block, but it's in another part of the village. And what they do is that they protect the village with this awful looking kind of spirit. You know, it's a person all dressed up, got on a mask, and stands at the gate that enters there. He's always there, but we found out there's not a man under there, it's a woman under there. It's a woman dressed up like that protects the female village, and it's a man dressed up, so you can't go in. And in those 5 years, they learn everything that they have to know in order to protect their village and raise their children, so that their children can raise their children, and so that the ancestors and the genealogy continues. And so we need to do that. And I said we have to do whatever we can do wherever we are. And so that these male children need other male models showing them how they can be protected. And one way is that, hey, you don't drop out of school. Right? How can you be protected if you are dropping out of school at the 9th or 10th grade, or if you don't know how to read? You see, we've got to fix it so that they understand it as it relates to where we are right now in 1989 in this particular place. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to move right ahead, and after the next speaker, then we're going to break for lunch. Wait a minute. Yeah, well, we'll see. No.